The dust storm had come out of nowhere. It was supposed to be a peaceful day on the desert planet of Vorith, a remote world known for its scorching sun, endless sands, and isolation. The locals had long given up on expecting anything less than the harshness of nature's extremes. But for Marcus Reed, a former soldier turned bounty hunter, the storm would mark the beginning of a life-changing event. Marcus had been on his usual trek across the barren wastelands of Vorith, searching for any bounty that might help him earn a decent wage. His cargo pod, a rusty, weathered vehicle used for scouting, rumbled across the dunes as he navigated the treacherous terrain. His eyes scanned the horizon, his fingers wrapped around the steering controls, when he spotted something that made him stop dead in his tracks. A figure, a woman, stood alone in the middle of the desert. Her clothing was tattered, and her long, silver hair whipped around in the winds of the approaching storm. She didn't seem to be afraid, her posture regal, as though she belonged there, standing defiantly in the face of nature's fury. What struck Marcus even more was the air around her. There was an almost tangible energy to her presence, something that felt alien yet captivating. Against his better judgment, Marcus pulled up next to her. The storm was getting worse, and he had no idea what this woman was doing alone in such an inhospitable place. "You need shelter," Marcus shouted over the howling winds, his voice barely audible. She turned to face him, her eyes glowing with an otherworldly intensity. "I cannot hide from the storm. I must wait." Her voice was melodic, like music woven with the hum of an unseen force. Marcus didn't understand why, but something in him urged him to help her. Without further hesitation, he reached out, pulling her into his pod and securing her inside just as the storm hit with full force. Inside the cramped vehicle, they both sat in silence for a moment, the howling winds muffled by the pod's thick metal walls. The woman's breathing was steady, almost serene, while Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that there was something extraordinary about her. He studied her closely. Despite her tattered clothes, there was something regal about her. Her features were striking, slender, almost ethereal, with sharp cheekbones, silver hair that shimmered even in the dim light, and eyes that glowed faintly with an unearthly hue. Her skin seemed to radiate a soft glow, as though she wasn't fully from this world. Finally, Marcus broke the silence. "What's your name?" "I am Alara," she replied softly, her voice carrying a weight that was both peaceful and commanding. The two of them sat in silence as the storm raged on outside. Hours passed, and the storm eventually subsided. Marcus was about to drive away when the distant rumble of engines reached his ears. He tensed, his instincts kicking in. He turned to Alara, concern etched on his face. "We're not alone. We need to move now." Before she could reply, the sound of gunfire cracked through the air. A group of raiders, armed to the teeth, had appeared on the horizon, intent on seizing whatever they could. Marcus swore under his breath and quickly powered up the vehicle, but the raiders were faster. They closed in quickly, their weapons raised, and Marcus knew they wouldn't hesitate to kill for whatever they could steal. He didn't hesitate. He grabbed his blaster, ready to fight. But before he could even raise his weapon, Alara's hand reached out, her fingers glowing. In a flash, the raiders were thrown back, their weapons ripped from their hands, as if a wave of invisible force had struck them. The sheer power of it left Marcus speechless. "Stay back," Alara said calmly, her eyes narrowing in focus. Marcus stared at her, bewildered. He had just seen her wield power that was beyond anything he'd ever known. The raiders struggled to regain control, but they were no match for Alara. With a flick of her wrist, they were disarmed, and within moments, they were fleeing, their vehicle speeding off into the distance. Marcus stood frozen, staring at the spot where the raiders had been. Alara had saved them. But how? Who was she? Before he could speak, Alara collapsed, falling to her knees as the glowing in her eyes dimmed. I shouldn't have used that much energy, she gasped, her voice strained. Without thinking, Marcus rushed to her side, kneeling beside her. What's wrong? You're hurt. No, she whispered, her eyes flickering as she leaned into his arms. I am not from this planet. I am a princess, the heir to a kingdom far beyond this world. I've been stranded here, hiding from my enemies. Marcus' heart raced. He had no idea who she was, but there was something about her, something that made him want to protect her. He gently lifted her in his arms, her frailty now more apparent than ever. What do you mean, princess? He murmured, trying to piece together the strange puzzle of her identity. Alara smiled weakly, though it was full of sadness. I was exiled, abandoned by my own people. I had come here in search of something, but my enemies followed me. I can't outrun them forever. Marcus understood little, but he knew one thing for certain: he couldn't let her down. She had saved him and protected him. It was now his turn to return the favor. Without another word, he carried her to his craft and flew off into the vast expanse of space. As they sped away from the desert planet, Marcus knew that his life would never be the same. What he thought was a simple bounty had turned into something far greater. Alara wasn't just a stranded woman. She was a princess, a lost heir to a powerful empire. And now, Marcus had a new mission: to protect her. Days turned into weeks, and Marcus found himself not only caring for Alara, but growing closer to her. They shared stories of their lives, their hopes, and fears. She told him of her home planet, of the royal palace, and the brutal politics that had led to her exile. Despite her strength, Alara was fragile, a woman torn from her world and forced into hiding. But in her eyes, Marcus saw something more. He saw a woman who had been pushed to the brink of despair, yet still held the strength to fight for her survival. As they traveled from one planet to the next, Marcus' bond with Alara grew. He trained her, helping her regain control of her powers, and together they fought back against the enemies who sought to capture her. But in the quiet moments between battles, it was clear that their connection was more than just survival. They had become partners in the truest sense. The day came when they received word from a distant planet that Alara's enemies had finally found her. The battle that followed would determine the fate of her kingdom, and perhaps the fate of the galaxy itself. But Marcus didn't hesitate. He fought beside her with all the strength he had, defending her at all costs. He had lost an arm in the process, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that he had kept his promise to protect her. In the end, they emerged victorious. Alara reclaimed her rightful place as the queen of her people, and Marcus, the man who had once been a simple bounty hunter, was hailed as a hero. His lost arm had become a symbol of his sacrifice, his loyalty, and his love for the woman who had changed his life. As the stars glistened above them, Marcus and Alara stood together, ready to face the future, no longer as strangers, but as partners and rulers of a new kingdom, one built on strength, love, and the bond they had formed in the most unlikely of places.